Welcome to The Market That Moves America, a podcast from the National Center for the Middle Market. The center is the leading source of knowledge, leadership, and innovative research on the middle market economy. Throughout our podcast, we will feature middle market leaders and stakeholders to hear their real-world perspectives on trends and emerging issues.
Canada is the world's 8th largest economy with nominal GDP over $2 trillion. But just as in other parts of the world, there's a thriving middle market in Canada. And new research from the NCMM takes a look at these companies for the very first time. Today's episode will feature a Toronto-based expert from Visa Commercial Solutions who will talk about insights and advice from this groundbreaking study. Welcome to The Market That Moves America. My name is Doug Farron, Managing Director of the National Center for the Middle Market, located at The Ohio State University Fisher College of Business. On today's episode, we are very excited to talk about a relatively new area of exploration for NCMM, which is looking at middle market companies in Canada. And in order to approach this topic, we were thrilled that our partners and friends at Visa were kind enough to help support a new study that we recently completed, looking for the first time at Canada's middle market. Joining me today is an expert from Visa Commercial Solutions, and we're going to chat a little bit more about the research and about just broader topics related to the Canadian middle market as well. But Sarah Steele is joining us today. Sarah is the Senior Director of Small Business and Middle Market Products for North America at Visa Commercial Solutions. Welcome, Sarah.
Thanks, Doug. It's great to be here with you. I'm really excited to chat about the middle market today.
Great. I'm excited as well. As I mentioned, this is a new area of research for us, so we're really thrilled about the chance to look at these businesses. So before we start, can you tell us, Sarah, a little bit about your current role at Visa Commercial Solutions, and then maybe a little bit more about your background in general?
Yeah, sure. So in my role at Visa, I'm responsible for small business and middle market products for North America, as you mentioned. I'm actually based in Toronto, Canadian, born and raised. I've been at Visa for over 10 years in quite a variety of different roles, including strategy, consulting. I've been supporting commercial solutions for over 5 years. And prior to Visa, I was at Citi in their global transaction business. So lots of experience with payments, and I would say I'm extremely passionate about B2B, including the middle market. So, got lots of great experience and excited to chat with you today.
Great. So why don't we start with first, tell me a little bit about Visa Commercial Solutions' motivation to study the middle market. So we've been working together for the last 3+ years on the U.S. middle market, but what was the motivation around looking at Canada?
Yeah, I mean, Canada is a really important market for Visa. We do know that it's similar to the U.S. And that the middle market in Canada is a huge contributor to the economy. But there isn't as much research available for the segment in the Canadian market, and we wanted to gain a deeper understanding. So we're excited to partner with the National Center for the Middle Market and bring specifically the MMI, or the Middle Market Indicator, to Canada to the forefront for the first time. We also hear directly from our clients in the Canadian market that it's a really important segment for them. Traditionally, some perspectives are that the middle market has been underserved and under-recognized, but we wanted to shine a spotlight here and get a better understanding of what's really going on with Canadian companies specifically.
Yeah, and that fits perfectly into our mission as well. So we were glad that we could do it.
Yeah, for sure. And in Canada, just to set some context, when you look at the StatsCan data, medium businesses represent just under 2% of total businesses, but contribute 16% to the Canadian GDP and employ over 17% of private sector employees. So despite its size, really important to the economy. And we want to understand and serve and support growth in this segment.
Sure. What were some of the highlights of the research for you as you kind of read through the data and then obviously the finished report? Was there anything in there that kind of confirmed your understanding already, or things that might have surprised you?
Yeah, and it's interesting because I guess restating the obvious, this is our first report for the NCMM and Visa together on Canada middle market. And so when we looked at the data and the insights, a lot of the comparisons that we drew were from what we know about the US middle market. And so in that context, there were a few things that stood out. Firstly, there was a lot of optimism in the Canadian data and insights, a little more than what we saw in the recent study in the US. Are Canadians more optimistic in general? I'm not sure, but there were a few interesting insights that pointed to potentially why we saw some of that. And a couple things. So middle market companies in Canada perform just as well or slightly better than their US counterparts. And when we say perform, we were talking about some of the questions about year over year revenue growth. Mm-hmm. Another indicator was when you looked at the different levels of leaders at these companies, it was strong confidence at all levels, which was a little bit of a contrast. And then the third thing that I thought was really interesting is that Canadian middle market companies felt that they were faring better at the time of the survey than a year ago, a little bit better than in the US. So some interesting things to dig into.
Yeah, certainly. Those are some of the key insights that we noted on our side as well. Just from obviously being a Canadian and living in Canada and all of your professional experience, what are some other maybe similarities or differences that you would note between U.S. and Canadian mid-sized companies? Outside of the data, I think some of the stats that you shared are super relevant because we see kind of a similar makeup within the broader economy, but just in the way that they're structured or how they operate or how they're led, are there any other things that you've seen throughout your career?
I mean, I think that there are definitely a lot of similarities, but when you look at the Canadian market, Canada is smaller. Just like that's a fact. We're about a tenth the size of the U.S. market, and that holds true across many different metrics. But when you looked at how that overlays with some of the insights in the report, I thought it was one of the really interesting things that I thought was fascinating was how when you look at the contrast between what we call, I guess, the lower middle market, like the 10 million to 50 million revenue band versus the core middle market versus the upper middle market, those highest revenue middle market companies, which would be over 100 million and up to $1 billion. In Canada, we saw that it was the smaller middle market companies that had the strongest growth in revenue versus last year. And the exact opposite was true in the US. So, in Canada, maybe due to the smaller scale of the economy, we're seeing those smaller companies really, outperforming versus some of their other middle market peers. And the exact opposite was true in the US.
Mm-hmm. Yep. What are some of the challenges that you either, again, referring to the research or just from what you've seen, what are the challenges that Canadian middle market companies face as they think about growing their businesses or scaling or, just what are some of those headwinds that they might encounter?
Yeah. I mean, and this shouldn't be a surprise to our listeners, inflation, rising costs of supplies, pressure on margins, that really rose to the top and probably not different from our US counterparts or what we're seeing, frankly, globally. That's really something that is front and center for Canadian companies too. And they're probably, because of the large amount of cross-border that happens with Canadian companies and Canada's big reliance on the US economy, that can sort of translate to, a little bit more uncertainty with exchange rates and so on. So that sort of economic indicators are definitely front and center and big concerns. The second one on the list was really about talent. And again, I know that we've uncovered that insight through other waves with the MMI in the US, but it continues to be a struggle, and it's a struggle in Canada too, that they don't have enough people to meet their needs. And we saw that digital skills gap has had a negative impact on Canadian companies, even more than US companies in some cases. And then the last thing that I'll mention is, and I'm sure we can talk about it more, but digitization and AI seem to be big opportunities that Canadian middle market companies could specifically really use to take them to the next level to find more efficiencies. So those are some of the really interesting challenges that I think we uncovered here.
Yeah, talent has been at the forefront of the U.S. middle market for almost a decade now, based on how we've been tracking it. And I'm sure with a smaller population, that might even be more of a problem for Canadian companies. Would you agree with that?
Yeah, I think so. And certainly, I think that would depend a lot on location. I think there are pockets where there are a lot of high talent employees where it might be a bit easier to close that gap or to face that challenge head on. But you're absolutely right. There's still a lot of competition for highly skilled workers from some of the largest enterprise and even from the US. In Canada, we talk about the brain drain, which is a phenomenon where US companies are competing for Canadian talent too in many respects. So it's certainly something that seems to be top of mind too, as we see in this research.
Yep. I definitely want to get into the technology and digital innovation piece a little bit. But before we do that, again, thinking about this research and perhaps some of your own experience, are there any other unique factors that you think are specific to Canadian companies that help them grow? So kind of the flip side of the challenges. What are you seeing from that standpoint?
Yeah, I mean, one of the interesting things, and it's consistent with other trends too, is that investing in digitization, we've been talking about digital transformation for many, many years. And it's seen as important. So when we asked in this survey, to recognize how important it was to drive growth and gain efficiencies, certainly it's seen as very important. But we did see that compared to some of the US middle market counterparts, Canada seems to be a little bit behind in terms of actually taking that desire to digitize a business and turning that into a reality. So I thought that was something that's almost an opportunity that middle market companies can really help to accelerate their growth if they did make some of those investments that they recognize are important.
Yeah. Why do you think that is? Are there like deterrents or barriers that prevent them from adopting more so than their US counterparts? Or are there other challenges that they face when it comes to technology?
Yeah, it certainly seems that way. And we saw that in the data here. And the list was long. There were some, I would say, common culprits that we would expect to rise to the top, like cost and resources and time, holding back investments, but also just some perception challenges, like companies feeling like it's already too late or that they're intimidated by the process. So,
right.
Those are things that we don't want to see. So hopefully, when you think about the ecosystem and all the players that are out there, whether it's FIs or technology companies, to support that, there are ways that we can articulate to middle market companies that it's not too late. It's never too late to invest in that technology.
Yeah, that seems like the mantra that we use here at the NCMM when we refer to middle market companies. We often say that they have big company opportunities, but small company resources. And oftentimes that holds them back too, because they've got to, run the show and keep all the trains running, and so to speak. And oftentimes some of these investments and like transformation opportunities just become less of a priority for them. But certainly it appears a big opportunity. I do want to follow up though. How does Visa think about digital and maybe supporting these companies specifically as we think about payments technology? You mentioned, there's obviously, we have cross-border implications when payments are going between the US and Canada, but are there other ways that Visa helps these companies think about their payments technology?
Yeah, for sure. I mean, it's such an important segment, but if we're honest with ourselves, I think all players in the ecosystem can do a better job of articulating and building purpose-built solutions for the middle market. When you think about the landscape, comparatively the vast number of small businesses, there's so many solutions in that space, but the middle market has more complex needs than what is typically provided there. And at the same time, some of the enterprise type solutions, they can be overly complex. They need to be more intuitive and less onerous to implement. So what I would say about how Visa thinks about this segment really, at the heart of it, it's our core card solutions, but really amplifying things like virtual cards and how virtual cards can help unlock, very onerous payment types and how they can turn them into digitally seamless payments. We have a virtual card engine, which is powered by APIs and some great user experiences to really make digital payments and reconciliation seamless. We're thinking all the time about embedded payments. So bringing that payment experience into the tools and applications that businesses are using every day. And then other sort of value-added services like harnessing the power of data to give middle market companies insights and control to facilitate those safe and secure payments. So those are some of the really key things that we're always thinking about.
Yeah. So connecting some of the dots here from the last few minutes of conversation, is there an education process that needs to take place to kind of show these companies that, hey, look, using these platforms, yes, you may have to invest and you may have to spend some time to learn how to leverage them fully, but ultimately, and in the long term, they will save you time. They will be more accurate. They will give you better insights, so on and so forth. Is that a process that these companies have to go through?
Yeah, totally. And the flip side of that too, I mean, I think of this as an opportunity for those who are servicing the middle market too, to make it easier to understand what that ROI is of adopting, this digital capability to automate your payables or this digital technology to streamline your accounting platforms and so forth. So it comes with from both sides that, we can help some of those middle market companies get over some of the perceived hurdles by really making it clear to them how these digital solutions are there to really help them grow and actually help them be more efficient and make more money and grow their business.
Yeah, that makes a ton of sense. Any other things that Visa Commercial Solutions is doing in particular to help companies, maybe even just think more generally about not just payments, but digital, like that it needs to be the future?
Yeah. I mean, it's so simple. And part of it is really that we're constantly investing in like really advanced technology that is all about making things simpler and making all payments, easy and seamless and frictionless, including for middle market companies in Canada. Yeah. So we've made some exciting announcements recently. And one example is, we're building a new commercial solutions hub, which is all about making it easy for financial institutions, fintech providers, as well as the underlying businesses to digitize and plug into a centralized platform that's easy to onboard. So it's really all about almost taking a consumer-like experience and bringing it to the middle market and, opening up the ecosystem to players across the board so that things aren't so siloed and fragmented.
Yeah. So as we wrap up here, Sarah, one last question for you. If there's middle market companies in Canada who might be listening to our conversation, what do you think they should take away from the study or advice that you might give? And then part two would be U.S. companies who may either partner with Canadian middle market companies as suppliers or customers. What should they know, or what are some of the takeaways they might have?
Oh, good questions. Okay, so starting from the Canadian side, a couple key takeaways for middle market companies. I guess I would say just stay focused on digital transformation, and whether that's adoption of AI tools, leveraging ways to bring automation and digitization into operations, processes, payments, technology, and lean on your trusted partners, your financial institution, your technology providers. There's a lot that they're doing to improve every day. And we didn't even get into AI, Doug. There's a whole section in the report about AI, and so
that could be its own podcast.
That's right. There's a little teaser in there. And then I guess from the U.S. side, I think most U.S. companies already know that Canada is the largest trading partner for the U.S. There are significant relationships between Canadian and U.S. companies. So continue to partner and invest with your Canadian buyers and suppliers. Yep. We could probably have a whole other podcast on cross-border, Doug, and and dig in there and check out the report. But maybe I'll turn it around to you, Doug. You're our middle market expert based in the U.S. What did you take away?
Yeah, one of the reasons we were so excited to work on this together with Visa was that for many years we've been looking at maybe some of the untapped opportunities that U.S. middle market companies can take advantage of to further support their own growth and scaling. And certainly technology, as we've talked about a lot today, AI within the last 18 months, is presenting a new and exciting opportunity as well. But international is, for us, a huge opportunity for these businesses. And as we've continued to do various studies over the years, most recently, earlier this year, we did a study on global supply chain management in the middle market for U.S. companies. And what we found is that, despite the opportunity, many of them just don't participate in cross-border. So it's a huge opportunity. And part of the reasons we touched on today, it's just, do they lack the expertise? Do they have the resources? Maybe fear of the unknown, fear of failure, like things that may exist in their minds, as the leadership teams might be viewing them as significant challenges. But the reality is, and as we have uncovered over the years, there's a lot of support available out there. Even with the U.S. government, there are commercial services teams that can really help middle market companies stand up these processes and make introductions. And as you mentioned, from a risk standpoint, Canada and then Mexico, even geographically, of course, they're very close, but would make the most sense as a place to start. So, I would echo your comments. Like, if you are already working with Canadian partners, just continue to build that relationship. And if you haven't done so, I would say, don't be afraid of exploring those, because there could be some really good opportunities on both sides of the border to help drive growth.
100%. Well said, Doug. And I would add that there are Canadian government resources in the BDC and the EDC as well to help facilitate all of those things. So between what's available in the US and Canada, I think lots of potential to explore.
Excellent. Well, I want to thank you for your time. This has been a really wonderful conversation. And I would just, again, invite listeners to, if you haven't seen the report, you can download it at our center website, which is middlemarketcenter.org. And Sarah, again, want to thank you for your time and insights today.
Doug, it was a pleasure. Thank you for having me.
Okay, thank you. And we'll talk to everybody again soon.
Thank you for listening to The Market That Moves America. Never miss a new episode by subscribing anywhere podcasts can be found. You can also subscribe to our email newsletter at middlemarketcenter.org.